The story begins in a remote corner of the galaxy, far beyond the bustling core worlds, where most civilizations rarely look. In this quiet stretch of space, a small alien mining colony existed, almost invisible to the rest of the galaxy. The colony was not rich, not famous, and certainly not armed. Its inhabitants were mostly scientists, engineers, and miners who were more interested in studying the stars and extracting rare minerals than in politics or war. The main character, Dr. Kelva, was one of these inhabitants. He was a scientist, a thinker, and someone who always noticed things others ignored. While most of the colony went about their daily routine of mining and maintenance, Kelva spent his time studying the deep space anomalies that occasionally appeared in the region. Kelva was different from the other colonists in many ways. While most were content with a simple life and safety within the colony's walls, he had an insatiable curiosity. He would spend hours staring at star maps, analyzing gravitational waves, and tracking the tiniest disturbances in space. For weeks, he had been noticing something unusual, subtle ripples in the fabric of space that didn't match any known natural phenomena. At first he thought it was a sensor malfunction, but after cross-checking readings for days, he realized that the anomalies were real and persistent. Something or someone was moving through this sector of space in a way that had never been recorded before. Despite the warnings his instruments were giving, the local governors and administrators of the colony dismissed his findings. They were used to calm, peaceful days in a quiet part of the galaxy. They had no armies, no fleet, and certainly no experience dealing with dangerous outsiders. They believed that the region was too isolated to attract any real trouble, thinking that the distance alone would protect them. Kelva tried to convince them otherwise, explaining that the anomalies could indicate the presence of hostile ships or predators. But the governors were stubborn and short-sighted. They argued that worrying about distant threats was a waste of time and resources. This dismissal frustrated Kelva, but he knew he could not give up. His instincts told him that danger was coming, whether the governors wanted to believe it or not. Unknown to the colony, a pirate group known as the Ravagers of Galvan had been watching the area for months. The Ravagers were infamous across several star systems for their ruthlessness. They attacked isolated colonies, looted supplies, and rarely left survivors. Their strategy was simple. They struck where no one could fight back, taking whatever they wanted without facing consequences. The mining colony in question was perfect for them. It was isolated, defenseless, and full of valuable resources. As the Ravagers approached, their enormous ships blocked out light in the distant stars, and their scanners locked onto the colony's energy signatures. They had no mercy planned. This was just another easy target for them to exploit. Kelva, still working in his lab, finally detected the approach of the Ravager ships. His instruments showed multiple large vessels moving at high speed toward the colony. Panic began to rise in the command center as alarms went off. The governors, who had laughed at his warnings before, now realized that Kelva had been right all along. Fear spread through the colony like wildfire. Colonists who had never faced danger before ran through corridors unsure of what to do. Some hid, others tried to prepare defenses that the colony didn't have. The situation was chaotic and the Ravagers would be there in minutes. In his desperation, Kelva remembered an ancient communication device stored in the deepest archives of the colony. It was forbidden technology, rumored to be tied to long-lost civilizations. The device could send a distress signal far beyond the usual communication range, possibly reaching species that most believed to be myths. Among these legends were the Deathworlders of Earth, humans who lived on a planet that was far deadlier than most could imagine. The stories said they were incredibly strong, highly intelligent, and nearly impossible to defeat. While many dismissed these as exaggerated tales, Kelva had a feeling that if any species could save the colony, it would be them. With no other options left, Kelva activated the device. He sent out an SOS signal imbued with the desperation and urgency of a species fighting for survival. The signal was powerful, traveling through deep space faster than any conventional communication. The moment the pulse left the device, the entire colony felt a shift, almost like the air itself had become heavier. The Ravagers, still approaching, detected the unusual energy signature and were momentarily puzzled. They had never encountered a signal like this. Their sensors, designed for scanning normal colonies, could not understand the pattern. The Ravagers laughed, thinking it was a harmless quirk or some last act of fear by a dying species. They did not realize the magnitude of what Kelva had just done. As the SOS traveled across space, Kelva and the remaining survivors prepared for the inevitable attack. They barricaded doors, tried to salvage weapons, and did whatever they could to protect themselves, knowing it might not be enough. Minutes felt like hours. Every distant sound, every flicker on the monitors, made the colonists' hearts pound. Kelva remained calm outwardly, but inside, he was terrified. He knew that activating the SOS was a gamble. If no one came, the colony would be destroyed, and his people would die. If someone did come, it could be far more powerful and dangerous than he could imagine. Then the first unusual signs began to appear on the colony's sensors. Tiny disturbances in space, far beyond the Ravager's ships, indicated that something massive was moving closer. The energy signature was immense, unmatched by any human technology, or so the Ravagers thought. Panic began to spread among them as they realized the anomaly was growing rapidly, larger and closer with each passing second. Kelva watched in awe and fear. He could not see the source yet, but he knew instinctively that something extraordinary was answering the call. The introduction ends with the colony on the brink of destruction, the Ravagers closing in, and Kelva holding onto a fragile hope that the SOS had reached someone somewhere capable of turning the tide. In this quiet corner of the galaxy, a desperate plea had been sent, bridging the distance between myth and reality. What happens next would change everything the colonists believed about danger, courage, and the unknown powers lurking in the stars. This sets the stage for the rising challenge that will come in the next part, as the distant SOS begins to attract attention, and the legends of the Deathworlders become something very real. The moment the SOS signal left the colony's ancient communication device, the situation escalated faster than anyone could have imagined. The mining colony, already tense from the looming arrival of the Ravagers, now faced an uncertainty far greater than any they had prepared for. Dr. Kelva, despite his calm outward demeanor, felt the weight of the colony's survival pressing on him. He had taken a risk that could either save them or bring about their complete destruction. His heart raced as he monitored every sensor, every reading, trying to detect any sign that the signal had actually been received. For now, all he could see were the advancing Ravager ships, massive vessels that cast shadows across space, heading straight for the colony. The Ravagers, completely unaware of what had been transmitted, continued their approach, confident in their superiority. They had never encountered a colony that could resist them, and they had no reason to believe this one would be any different. Their ships were armed with powerful weapons, capable of tearing through the colony's weak defenses with ease. Inside their command centers, Ravager officers laughed at the sight of Kelva's desperate attempts at preparation. They believed that within minutes the colony would be nothing more than smoke and debris. The colonists were unarmed, untrained in combat, and facing forces far beyond anything they could fight. To the Ravagers, this was an easy victory, a chance to collect resources and leave without any effort. Back on the colony, chaos had erupted. The colonists scrambled through corridors, trying to secure themselves, salvage whatever tools or makeshift weapons they could find, and protect the most vulnerable among them. Families huddled together, terrified for their lives. The scientists, engineers, and miners who had spent their entire lives in routine and study now faced the stark reality of imminent death. Kelva moved from room to room, giving calm instructions, directing people to safer zones, and trying to keep fear from overwhelming them entirely. He knew that panic could be just as dangerous as the Ravagers themselves. Every passing moment increased the danger, and yet the hope that the SOS might reach someone capable of helping remained the only thing keeping him focused. Meanwhile, something extraordinary began to happen far beyond the colony's senses. The SOS, sent through the ancient communication device, traveled across vast distances in space. The signal was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Its energy signature was powerful, almost impossible to ignore, and it moved through hyperspace with an urgency that conveyed the colony's desperation. Somewhere across the stars, beings far stronger and more dangerous than the Ravagers began to detect it. These beings, known in legend as the Deathworlders of Earth, had a history that few in the galaxy understood. They were humans, and while myths painted them as fearsome warriors who thrived in deadly environments, very few had ever witnessed them in action. Yet the SOS was designed to reach exactly such a species, one that could respond when the weak were threatened. On the colony, Kelva and the survivors noticed the first unusual changes. Tiny anomalies appeared in the space around the Ravager ships, strange energy readings that their instruments could barely interpret. The Ravagers themselves were momentarily confused, their scanners picking up the same anomalies. Their confidence began to waver, but their pride prevented them from slowing down or retreating. They did not yet understand that the danger approaching was far beyond their comprehension. The signals from the SOS were not just messages, they were warnings, and the Ravagers had just started to sense that something had been triggered, something beyond their control. As the Ravagers drew closer, their attack formations became more aggressive. They fired their weapons at the colony, tearing apart the outer defenses and causing explosions that echoed across the mining platforms. Debris rained down, and panic intensified among the colonists. Many of them had never seen death up close, and the scale of destruction was overwhelming. Kelva tried to maintain order, coordinating small teams to rescue trapped colonists, stabilize structural damage, and guide survivors to safer areas. Despite the chaos, he refused to let fear dominate him. He knew that survival depended on clear thinking and rapid decision-making, and he did everything in his power to keep hope alive. Then, without warning, the anomalies in space intensified. The sensors detected massive energy signatures moving toward the colony at incredible speed. These were not the Ravager ships, nor were they any natural phenomenon Kelva had ever studied. The energy readings were immense, impossible to ignore, and growing with each passing second. Even the Ravagers, arrogant and experienced as they were, began to realize that they had triggered something they did not understand. Their officers shouted commands, attempting to reposition their ships and retreat. But the strange force approaching was faster, larger, and far more dangerous than anything they had encountered. For the first time, they felt true fear. Kelva, watching the readings, realized that the SOS had been successful. Whatever had answered the call was on its way, and it was enormous. He could not see the source directly, but the energy signatures indicated a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. It was approaching with terrifying speed and precision. The colonists around him, still struggling to comprehend the danger, began to notice the changes as well. The stars outside the colony's observation windows seemed to warp and shimmer, as if reality itself was being disturbed. The arrival of this mysterious force was imminent, and it would change everything. The Ravagers, now aware that they had miscalculated, attempted desperate maneuvers. They fired more aggressively, hoping to destroy the colony before whatever was coming could arrive. Yet, even as their weapons lashed out, there was a growing sense of dread among their crews. Their senses continued to pick up strange, massive objects moving through space, and they could not identify them. The usual confidence and arrogance of the Ravagers began to crumble. In the command center of the largest Ravager ship, officers shouted at one another, trying to make sense of the readings. They had never seen anything like it, and every second brought the approaching fleet closer. For Kelva, the sight of the anomalies growing larger was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He understood that if the legends were true, the beings responding to their SOS were incredibly powerful. The myths of the Deathworlder, stories of humans capable of surviving the deadliest environments and facing impossible odds, was suddenly becoming reality. Kelva's hope surged alongside his fear. He knew that the colony's fate hung in the balance, and that survival would depend on the beings answering their call, choosing to intervene. In the meantime, every second counted. He continued to coordinate the colonists' defensive efforts. But now there was a sense of anticipation mixed with terror. Something was coming, and it was unstoppable as the energy signatures continued to grow. Strange effects began to appear in the colony's systems. Sensors glitched, lights flickered, and alarms blared unpredictably. The Ravagers noticed these disruptions too, and confusion spread among their ranks. It was clear that the approaching fleet was affecting space itself, creating phenomena that the pirates could neither understand nor counter. The colonists, witnessing these effects, began to hope. Perhaps this was the intervention they had prayed for, the arrival of help that could turn the tide. Kelva encouraged them to stay focused, to keep moving towards safe zones, and to trust that the SOS had reached someone capable of responding. Then, the first glimpses of something massive began to appear on the colony sensors. Shapes emerged from hyperspace, enormous in scale and moving with precision that no known species could achieve. The sensors barely processed the readings before they overloaded, signaling objects far larger and more powerful than anything in the colony's history. Even the Ravagers, hardened and ruthless as they were, felt a growing sense of panic. Their confidence shattered. They realized that they were no longer in control. The approaching force was beyond their comprehension, and it would determine the fate of everyone in the system. The rising tension, chaos, and anticipation set the stage for the next phase of the story. The SOS had worked, drawing attention from a legendary species whose reputation was as terrifying as it was awe-inspiring. The Ravagers were now facing a danger they could not flee, and the colonists were holding on to a fragile hope that salvation was near. The scene was set for a confrontation that would challenge expectations, redefine myths, and demonstrate the power of courage, desperation, and the unknown. The calm before the storm shattered completely as the void of space tore open near the colony. From this rupture emerged something unimaginably, an enormous fleet of ships, dark and silent, moving with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. The sensors aboard the mining colony overloaded, trying to process their size and speed. Dr. Kelva stared at the readings, his heart pounding, as the reality sank in. The legends were true. The SOS had been answered by the Deathworlders of Earth, the humans, and they were not here to negotiate. The first vessels to appear were massive, far larger than any ship the colony had ever seen, or even the Ravagers' enormous battlecruisers. Their hulls absorbed light, giving them a shadowy, almost ghostly appearance. Each ship moved in perfect formation, with smaller fighters weaving between colossal carriers and battleships. The energy signatures radiating from them were immense, pulsing like a heartbeat through space itself. For Kelva, the sight was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He had read stories about the humans, about their deadly home planet and survival against all odds. But he had never imagined encountering them in person, and now they were here, answering a call he had sent in desperation. The Ravagers' confidence, once unshakable, began to crumble almost immediately. Their scanners picked up the incoming fleet and failed to identify it. Officers shouted frantic orders, trying to reposition their ships and avoid the approaching human vessels. Panic set in. They had assumed the colony would be an easy target. Now, the roles were reversed. These were not just humans, they were Deathworlders, and the rumors about their ruthlessness and strategic genius were suddenly being confirmed in real. The Ravagers realized, perhaps too late, that their arrogance had brought them into a trap far beyond their ability to handle. Kelva watched as the first human warships entered the colony's local space. Despite their massive size, they moved with astonishing speed and coordination. The sensors barely kept up with their maneuvers, and every time the humans adjusted their position, the Ravager's ships were forced to respond, often too slowly or too clumsily. It became immediately clear that these were not ordinary ships, and that these humans had far greater firepower and tactical awareness than anyone in the region. The colony's defenders, weak as they were, could only watch in awe and fear as the incoming fleet established control over the battlefield that the humans didn't attack immediately. Instead, they scanned, analyzed, and assessed the situation with cold efficiency. For the colonists, this pause was excruciating. Every second the Ravagers remained in the system, more destruction occurred. But the human strategy was precise and deliberate. They were not mindless aggressors, they were punishing those who attacked the weak. The Ravagers, sensing the calm before the storm, made a fatal mistake. They refused to retreat. They fired upon the human fleet, hoping to strike first and maintain control. That decision would seal their fate. When the Ravagers opened fire, the human fleet responded with unimaginable speed and power. The first salvo of human weapons struck without warning, destroying several Ravager frigates in an instant. The colonists watched in shock as entire sections of enemy ships vanished in flashes of energy. Unlike conventional battles, there was no chaos, no missed shots. Every movement, every strike was calculated to perfection. The humans were methodical, precise, and terrifying. The Ravagers, who had prided themselves on being unstoppable, now found themselves completely outmatched. Their pride turned to panic, and panic turned to desperation. The most critical moment came when the largest Ravager dreadnought, a ship almost the size of a small moon, attempted a final strike on the colony. Its plan was simple: destroy the survivors before the humans could intervene. The dreadnoughts, weapons charged, and it began moving toward the mining platforms with deadly intent. Kelva and the survivors froze as the massive vessel loomed in the observation screens, the ground shaking as its engines fired. There seemed no way to stop it. The colony was defenseless. And then it happened. A human warship, the TFS Valiant, moved directly between the dreadnought and the colony. The Valiant's shields flared to life, absorbing the impact of the dreadnought's massive weapons. Kelva watched in disbelief as the warship held firm, enduring a strike that should have obliterated it instantly. The precision of the human fleet became even more apparent as smaller human destroyers moved into position, firing with pinpoint accuracy to target the dreadnought's weak points. Within moments, the massive ship was shredded apart, its destruction complete and silent. Kelva could hardly believe what he was seeing. The humans were not only protecting the colony, they were willing to risk their own ships, their own lives, to ensure the survivors were safe. The stories about the Deathworlders being dangerous were true, but not in the way most civilizations believed. They were lethal to aggressors, yes, but they were also fiercely protective of the innocent. The myth had underestimated their morality, their discipline, and their strategic brilliance. Kelva realized in that moment that these beings were not only powerful, they were unstoppable when it came to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The remaining Ravagers, now seeing the destruction of their dreadnought and the overwhelming coordination of the human fleet, attempted to flee. Their ships were smaller and faster, but even their speed could not outmatch the humans' ability to intercept. One by one, Ravager ships were disabled, captured, or destroyed. There was no mercy for those who had attacked the weak. Kelva noticed that even the pirates' most experienced officers were beginning to surrender, their bravado completely broken by the humans' presence. What had started as an attack on a defenseless colony had turned into a demonstration of absolute, uncompromising force. Throughout the battle, Kelva remained on the observation decks, guiding survivors to safer areas, trying to keep them calm. He was struck not only by the humans' power but by the way they moved. They were coordinated, disciplined, and yet calm. They did not panic, they did not waste energy, and every action had a clear purpose. It was like watching a predator that was fully aware of its own strength but used that strength with precision and control. The humans were terrifying in battle, but in a way that was strangely reassuring to those being protected. As the final Ravager ships fell, the battlefield went silent. The human fleet remained, scanning for any remaining threats, their presence dominating the entire sector. The survivors of the colony began to emerge from hiding, cautiously watching the warships that had saved their lives. They had witnessed the impossible, a species long thought to be myths, responding to a desperate SOS, arriving in force, and eliminating the attackers with unmatched efficiency. For Kelva, the reality of what had just happened sank in. The SOS had not only brought salvation, it had summoned the most lethal, disciplined, and protective force the galaxy had ever seen. Kelva reflected on the irony of the situation. For weeks he had been dismissed as a cautious alarmist. The colony's governors had ignored his warnings, believing that danger was too far away to matter. Now, the consequences of their negligence had been laid bare. They had been saved, yes, but only because Kelva had taken a bold risk and activated a forbidden communication device. Without that decision, the colony would have been destroyed. He realized the value of courage and intuition in moments of extreme crisis. Sometimes, the right choice was not the safe choice, it was the one that could change fate itself. By the end of the critical moment, the Ravagers were no longer a threat, the colony was intact, and the survivors were stunned but safe. The human fleet remained in orbit, scanning the colony and preparing to assist further. Kelva finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, though he knew the danger was not entirely gone. The humans were powerful allies, yes, but their arrival had also changed the balance of power in the sector. Now, the presence of Deathworlders would be known to any who might consider preying on the weak, and the galaxy would have to reckon with a force that was both terrifying and unstoppable. This climactic part of the story sets the stage for the resolution that follows. The humans' intervention not only ends the immediate threat, but begins a new chapter for the colony and its people. The critical moment demonstrated the power of courage, desperation, and the myths of the Deathworlders coming alive in reality. Kelva's gamble had paid off, and now the survivors had a chance not only to live but to witness a force unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. After the terrifying battle, the silence that settled over the mining colony was almost unreal. The once chaotic corridors, filled with alarms and the frantic screams of the colonists, were now eerily quiet. Outside, the wreckage of ships floated in orbit, burned and shattered from the precision attacks of the Deathworlder fleet. The colony itself had survived, though not without some damage. Several outer platforms were scorched, storage modules destroyed, and a few minor explosions still smoldered. But against all odds, the colonists had lived. Dr. Kelva stood at the observation deck, staring at the human fleet that dominated the skies above. Their presence was imposing, yet there was something almost comforting about it. These were not conquerors, not looters. These were guardians, and their mission was clear: protect the innocent, punish the guilty. The first wave of human ships began deploying landing craft and drones to the colony. These vessels were sleek, efficient, and intimidating, yet their movements were deliberate and precise. Kelva watched as the human teams touched down, their advanced technology immediately stabilizing damaged sections of the colony. Collapsing walkways were reinforced, broken energy conduits repaired, and critical systems brought back online. Where colonists had been stranded or trapped during the attack, humans moved swiftly to free them, using specialized tools that could cut through wreckage without causing further damage. It was unlike anything Kelva had ever seen. Speed, efficiency, and care all combined into one unstoppable force. The human medics were the first to make contact with the survivors. They moved calmly, yet with an urgency that suggested experience in extreme crisis situations. Colonists were carefully lifted from debris, treated for burns, cuts, and fractures, and reassured in a way that immediately calmed panic. Kelva noticed something remarkable. The humans did not rush carelessly. Every action was measured. They assessed each injured individual, prioritized treatment based on severity, and worked in perfect coordination. The difference between their efficiency and the panicked efforts of the colonists earlier in the day was staggering. It was not brute force alone that had won the battle, it was discipline, skill, and strategy. Kelva took the opportunity to meet with the human leaders, hoping to understand who these incredible beings were and why they had come. He was guided to a ship that radiated authority and quiet power. The human commanding officer, Admiral Reyes, greeted him with a calm but firm presence. He did not scold Kelva for sending the SOS, nor did he question the legality of using the forbidden device. Instead, he spoke with clarity and purpose. He explained that the Deathworlders monitor signals from long-lost civilizations and civilizations in distress, particularly those using ancient frequencies. Their philosophy was simple: no species should be left to face annihilation alone, and predatory forces would be met with force if necessary. Kelva listened intently, both humbled and astonished by the explanation. The stories he had heard about humans had always emphasized their danger, but he was beginning to see another side: their sense of justice and protection for the weak. While the humans stabilized the colony, Kelva organized the survivors to assist in the recovery. Engineers were paired with human teams to repair damaged structures, scientists helped assess energy systems, and medics worked alongside the humans to ensure every colonist received care. Even though the survivors were exhausted and traumatized, the presence of the Deathworlders inspired them. Fear was replaced by determination. Kelva could see hope growing in the eyes of people who had just witnessed their world being torn apart and then saved by an unimaginable force. He realized that this intervention was more than just a rescue. It was a lesson in courage, resilience, and what it truly meant to protect the vulnerable. In orbit, the human fleet remained vigilant. Scouts patrolled the surrounding systems to ensure that no other hostile forces would take advantage of the colony's weakened state. The remaining Ravager ships were destroyed, captured, or fleeing, but the humans ensured that the region would remain secure for weeks, if not months. They also began to set up defensive satellites and relay stations for communication, providing the colony with a permanent link to Earth in case of future threats. Kelva watched these preparations and understood that the Deathworlders were not temporary saviors. They were establishing a lasting presence, a guarantee that this corner of space would no longer be defenseless. As the recovery progressed, Kelva had moments to reflect on the day's events. He thought about the gamble he had taken, activating the forbidden communication device. At the time, it had seemed reckless, perhaps even foolish, but it had worked. The SOS had reached beings capable of ending the attack and saving countless lives. The risk he took had not only protected the colony but had also demonstrated the power of action in the face of fear. He realized that sometimes survival depended not only on planning or preparation but on bold decisions made at the right moment. The human fleet did not linger unnecessarily. Their operations were efficient, focused, and purposeful. They did not waste resources or linger in idle display of power. After stabilizing the colony, treating the injured, and securing the surrounding space, the humans began to prepare for departure. Kelva and the colonists felt a mix of gratitude and reluctance. They had been saved by a force beyond comprehension. Yet the humans did not demand loyalty, payment, or recognition. Their actions were guided by principle alone, and their departure would leave the colony stronger and safer than before. Before leaving, Admiral Reyes spoke to Kelva once more. He emphasized that the human fleet's presence was both a warning and a promise. Predators like the Ravagers would think twice before attacking again, knowing that the Deathworlders would respond with overwhelming force. At the same time, any species in genuine need could call for help, and the humans would answer without hesitation. Kelva felt a profound respect for these beings, realizing that the myths about their deadly homeworld, their resilience, and their ruthlessness were only part of the truth. They were terrifying, yes, but only to those who preyed on the weak. For those in need, they were protectors beyond imagination. As the last of the human ships departed, the colony returned to a cautious calm. The survivors began rebuilding, stronger and wiser for the ordeal they had endured. They repaired structures, restored energy systems, and gradually resumed daily routines. Yet everything had changed. No longer could they consider themselves isolated or insignificant. They had seen the galaxy's power manifest in a single, extraordinary response to their desperate plea. They had learned that courage, hope, and initiative could summon forces that legends only hinted at. Kelva watched the departing human fleet fade into the stars, a sense of awe and gratitude swelling within him. In the following days, the colonists shared their story among themselves and with neighboring systems. The account of the Deathworlders' intervention spread quickly, inspiring other isolated communities to remain vigilant and courageous. Kelva documented every detail, knowing that one day, these records would be important not just as a historical account, but as a reminder of what courage and decisive action could achieve. The legend of the Deathworlders was no longer myth. It was reality, witnessed firsthand by those who had been saved. Finally, Kelva allowed himself a moment of personal reflection. He thought about the risk he had taken, the fear he had felt, and the incredible outcome that had followed. That humans had not only defeated the Ravagers but had demonstrated the values that defined them: discipline, courage, precision, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The colony had survived, not by chance, but because someone had chosen to act boldly in the face of overwhelming odds. Kelva realized that this moment would define the rest of his life, shaping his understanding of courage, morality, and the unknown powers that exist in the universe. As the sun rose over the mining platforms, casting light on the repaired structures and smiling faces of survivors, Kelva felt a sense of hope he had never known before. The danger had passed, but the lessons remained. In the vast, unpredictable galaxy, courage and initiative could summon unimaginable allies, and those who preyed on the weak would face consequences beyond their imagination. The resolution of this crisis had not only saved lives, it had changed the way the colony, and Kelva himself, would perceive the universe forever. In the weeks following the arrival and departure of the Deathworlder fleet, the mining colony entered a period of quiet recovery. The destruction left by the Ravagers had been repaired thanks to the humans' precise and efficient intervention, but the emotional impact lingered. Dr. Kelva walked through the colony's streets and corridors, observing the colonists as they rebuilt their lives. There was a sense of cautious optimism in the air, but also an underlying tension. Everyone had seen how close they had come to total annihilation, and no one could forget it. The human intervention had been swift and overwhelming, but it had also been a profound reminder of the fragility of life in a galaxy filled with unpredictable dangers. Kelva spent hours speaking with the survivors, documenting their experiences and thoughts. He was amazed at their resilience. Even after witnessing such terror, people were determined to restore normalcy, to return to the routines that made their lives meaningful. Families began repairing homes, engineers restored power grids, and the young miners, who had once thought only of rocks and energy crystals, now understood the stakes of living in such a dangerous corner of space. Yet, in quiet conversations and in the silent moments alone, they also reflected on the human fleet's arrival and what it had meant. The Deathworlders were no longer legends, they were real, and their capabilities far exceeded anything the colonists had imagined. For Kelva, reflection was even deeper. He thought about the decisions that had led to the SOS signal being sent, the desperate gamble that could have failed spectacularly. He realized that bravery often required risk, and that inaction could be just as dangerous as making the wrong choice. The choice to act, to summon the Deathworlders, had not only saved lives but had also revealed a broader truth about the galaxy's strength. Courage and morality often travel together, and even myths can become reality when circumstances demand it. He understood now that the human intervention was more than a battle, it was a lesson, a living example of how a species could wield power responsibly, and what it meant to protect those who could not protect themselves. The colony began to receive messages from neighboring systems and colonies who had heard of the event. Word spread quickly about the humans' arrival and the defeat of the Ravager. The story of the SOS, the desperate plea for help, and the overwhelming force that responded captured the attention of the wider region. Other colonies looked to the mining settlement as proof that even in the most isolated parts of the galaxy, help could come if one dared to act. Kelva became a quiet hero among the colonists, not because of personal glory, but because he had acted decisively and ensured the survival of hundreds of lives. His role as a scientist had always focused on observation and study, but now he understood that action, courage, and initiative could change destiny. During the recovery, Kelva also had the chance to reflect on the nature of the humans themselves. The Deathworlders had been terrifying in battle, yes, but they had shown a different kind of strength when interacting with the survivors. They were not reckless, nor did they seek glory or revenge. Their interventions were deliberate, precise, and governed by a moral compass that demanded justice for the innocent and retribution for aggressors. Kelva marveled at this combination of power and principle. Understanding that the myths he had grown up hearing had only captured one side of their nature, the humans were terrifying to those who would harm the weak, and benevolent, disciplined, and protective to those in need. As the weeks passed, Kelva worked to ensure that the colony would be better prepared for the future. The human fleet had left behind defensive satellites, communication relays, and guidance for long-term security. Kelva studied these systems, learning from the humans' methods and strategies. He realized that the galaxy was far more dangerous than most people understood, but that knowledge, preparation, and courage could provide safety. The colony would never again be completely defenseless, and the survivors were growing stronger both in skill and in confidence. Each repaired system, each rebuilt structure, and each story of survival became a testament to their resilience. The aftermath also brought moments of quiet reflection among the colonists. They remembered the fear, the chaos, and the destruction. But they also remembered the awe-inspiring arrival of the human fleet. The stories were shared of how the humans had coordinated perfectly, destroyed the Ravagers with surgical precision, and protected every vulnerable life. Children who had been too young to understand the gravity of the battle listened wide-eyed, learning not only about survival but also about courage, morality, and the extraordinary capabilities of the species that had saved them. These stories became lessons, passed down as both caution and inspiration. Kelva also reflected personally on how the events had changed him. He had always been cautious, analytical, and hesitant to take risks. But in that moment of desperation, he had acted decisively, sending the SOS that had saved hundreds of lives. He realized that true leadership often required courage under pressure, and that taking risks for the greater good was sometimes the only way to ensure survival. The experience left him wiser, stronger, and more confident in his ability to make difficult choices in the future. Finally, the colony settled into a new rhythm. Life continued, but it was different now. People moved with confidence, knowledge, and a shared understanding of the stakes of life in the galaxy. The presence of the human fleet had changed not only the immediate threat but the very way the colonists viewed the universe. They had faced annihilation, been saved by legends made real, and learned the value of courage, initiative, and the protection of the vulnerable. Kelva often looked to the stars, remembering the towering ships, the silent precision, and the awe-inspiring power of the Deathworlders. The experience was transformative, a reminder that in the vast, unpredictable galaxy, hope, courage, and decisive action could summon forces beyond imagination. As the sun rose over the repaired colony, casting light on the rebuilt structures and the smiling faces of the survivors, Kelva understood one final truth. The Deathworlders' intervention had not only saved lives, it had instilled hope, courage, and a vision of what was possible. The galaxy was dangerous, full of predators and unknown forces, but it was also full of allies, courage, and the potential for justice. The SOS had worked, and in answering it, the humans had not only brought retribution, they had shown the galaxy what true power, discipline, and morality looked like. The lessons of that day would echo for generations, shaping the future of the colony and Kelva himself, forever.